Record, my brother.
Nick, how you doing, man?
Good. Good. How are you? You're all sweaty from
You don't
walking.
have to mention this. I like the sad part is I walk for like 4 minutes. Let's say it's 200 meters. I walk for 200 meters. I'm actually sweating. I'm
You're a glistening little sweaty guy, and you're tanned. Where do you get a tan in Germany?
well.
Is this
I live on a farm. I have to do the gardening, and it's a lot of sunshine now. Thank heavens! Like it improves my mood. It really does. Like more energy, better mood. Sunshine is good for me.
all right? Well, did I tell you this? I published, or it's not published yet, but it's accepted. My first experiment, and I told you I've been doing these experiments, and at a
Oh
top journal,
wow!
so MISQ ISR. So this is an MISQ paper. Did it with a bunch of guys: Dan Pienta, Somanchi, Vishant, and this guy. Have you ever heard of this guy, Jason Thatcher?
Jason, who?
So Jason,
Just kidding.
So Jason, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is much anticipated, I guess. I'm getting emails from people saying,
I am getting emails from
this
people
is
too.
IS.
Look, Jason, if we ever had a guest that needs no introduction, and surely you must be like, as of I get WhatsApp messages saying like, when's the podcast with Jason coming out? You said it's gonna be April. It's May now. How dare you? So here you are. We're grateful. It was tricky to get the schedule right, but here we are. Very happy to be recording with you.
You know why it was? You know why it was tough to get Jason? Because he's never home. He's always in Germany and various other countries.
If there's a person that can use the possessive pronoun and talk about his Germans, it's not you, Nick. It's actually Jason. Jason has his Germans, I think.
I have friends. I like them. It's nice to see them.
But Jason, when you travel, don't you find that you drink too much? That's what I find is that I go places. Then I have dinner with people, and then I have drinks, and I'm like drinking every night. I have to like detox.
I'm not as cool as you. I don't think I get those invitations.
Oh, you don't simply don't drink as much. That could be the reason.
I mean, part of going along with my hair getting gray is my liver saying no more often. Yeah. So I save it up. So like Frühlingfest, Oktoberfest. I can't remember the name. There's a heavy beer festival I want to go to next year in Germany. Those are things I'll go to and enjoy. But night to night, I can't do it and travel the way I do.
Yeah.
So, Jason, I have a question about this. Like, this is years ago. Years ago, you told me that you started going to Germany and you started collaborating with Germans. And if I remember correctly, you said like it's because they have the most exciting projects and and access to really good data and you really enjoy working with them. And that totally speaks to my heart. And I would say the same thing, right? So we have European scholarship has upped the ante, the methodologically the sound, but they've always had these cool projects. And I do think that's attractive, isn't it?
That's the biggest reason I'm there, other than the people. So when I go visit TUM, for example, I can sit in a room. Last time I was there, they had one of the tech leads for BMW come in and talk to us. I met the lead for BMW's AI initiatives, not for the cars, but for the broader organization. Those kind of things that you don't get those touches in the States. You just don't.
And it's because these Germans all have PhDs, right? They get PhDs, but then they go back to industry. Whereas in the States, when you get a PhD, unless it's like data science or computer science, you're in academia primarily.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's some of it, but some of it is I think Germans value education and the respect scholarship. And in the States, there's this strong anti-intellectual sentiment going on right now. It has been for a while, and some of that's the American professor's fault because we don't study questions of interest to industry. We study questions of interest to MISQ and ISR sometimes. And when I go and I sit in a room full of Germans, I don't know which paper is going to show up in a UTD journal, but I can tell you I'm always going to learn something. And so every project I've done with a German chair and a German student, I've walked away from it, whether it showed up in BIZA, internet research, MIS Quarterly ISR, I learned something, right? And that's what keeps me going back. And honestly, it's the hard part is when I see those young guys and young women go out to industry again. They never finish the MISQ and ISR revisions, and
they don't.
Talk to me, right? That's really the hard part. But that actual initial ideation phase, there's nothing like working with a German chair. And what's really cool watching, I've learned a lot about how I manage my own group. I don't have a chair in a German sense, but I have an academic family in a German sense. I learned to interlock people. I learned to get kids talking across schools. I learned to get kids talking across academic cohorts. And what I learned from Helmut, and I learned from Manuel Visha and some others, and Daniel Feit, was they have a mentoring system in place. So they ladder, and senior students actively help junior students. And
Yep.
Americans don't. Americans train lone wolves. Like if you work with a German chair, you're working with a pack most often. And all those people don't show up on the paper, but all of them help each other, and all of them celebrate the successes of each other in a way I don't see happening at very many American schools, not in the same way.
It's funny that it's nice that you highlight that. It's me now spending the last 6 years, I think, by now here in Germany, and now I had the chance of visiting Georgia, right? And I basically saw the American system, and I was in awe of that because I thought, like, wow, that level of one-on-one mentorship, where the difference is that you take a village to raise a PhD student. And in Germany, every chair has a village full of PhD students, like the complete opposite, right? So, like in Georgia at UGA, they had the Department of IAS had 6 PhD students. I said, well, that's great. I have 6 of my own, So it's complete opposite. And I marveled at the advantages that you get from the village of professors teaching one single student. And you're marveling at the advantages that you might get if you have a cohort with a little bit of hierarchy in this, and in this sort of network that you create this way. So I guess that's
yeah. Sorry to interrupt. I'm bad at that. I interrupt a lot.
No, you're right. You're right.
So like the thing of it is what I'm trying to craft with my team is something in between.
Yeah, of course.
Where every student gets personal attention. I only have 1, 2, 3 students typically at a time I work with in the States. But I try to interlock them or interweave them with German students, with Chinese students, and help them think globally, but also interlock them within the academic family. Like Dan Pienta, who was on the paper, Nick mentioned, he works with students and friends of mine in Germany. He works with students or friends of mine in China, and then he works with other students within the group. And honestly, I think Dan is shaping more of what my group is doing right now than I am. And I'm happy with that. To me, that's like a sign of success. And Dan's about ready to peel off and do his own thing, and we'll have a beer at conferences. But I don't envision the next 5 years from now there'll be very many Pienta and Thatcher papers available. It's going to be Pienta and whoever. Right?
Yeah.
And that's what I want. And that's something I think is really valuable. And you see that happen. I think that the German system has more structure that leads to that, because that mentoring process leads to maturing, but also a sense of stewardship for the group. Whereas the American system I think is better at inculcating deep skills necessary to publish papers. It's not as much about team management. So Americans are really great at method. Americans are sometimes great at writing, not as often as you would think or as you would hope, but they're sometimes great at writing. Americans are really great at research design. But if I want to go and have a beer and a conversation about what's happening at B&W, I can't do that in Boulder, Colorado. And that might just be because I move too often and haven't built local contacts.
Well, give yourself some time. I mean, you moved to Colorado like a half a year ago or a year ago or something. That's not a lot of time.
We're in week 18. But it's more of a general critique of the American system, right? Whereas German chairs, because they're relatively stable and they interlock those kids over time, they also get introductions, and they meet people in those companies. And if a student goes to industry, suddenly like that Dr. Father or Dr. Mother, I've actually never heard anyone refer to a Dr. Mother, but I've heard Dr. Father a lot. But that Dr. Parent has a contact in the organization who is pretty loyal and pretty helpful. If they come to them and say, hey, could you help us figure this out? Or do you have a problem we need figured out? And because they understand research, they understand the commitment they're making, so the projects do better.
Jason has a little bit of German envy, I think, here. He likes the idea. And, there is an element for both of you from what I'm hearing about grass is greener, right? If you want access to industry in the US, you can just be a consultant. You get access to industry. You might not be able to publish it. And that's essentially a lot of what they're doing in Germany. They have these groups, and the groups essentially are doing consulting. And then they have these institutes like Fraunhofer Institute, right, which is actually funded by all of these big corporations. And then they are doing research, and they have these armies doing essentially, they call it research, but it's really consulting projects for those big companies, right? So,
and that's the deficiency of the system, right? Is the students don't have the time to think and step back and reflect often the way they do in the States, depending on the chair. Often they get caught working on an industry project. They get a day or two a week. They generate really great conference papers, but they don't have the bandwidth to generate the really great A papers they're capable of.
And they don't read. So every time I've worked with the German, the thing they find you mentioned BMW or whatever organization they're working with, they're like, look at this. This is the whatever, Internet 4.0. It's the this, it's the that. And it's like, yeah, so let's abstract that up. Look at the history of the generalizable problem that you're dealing with, and let's extend the cumulative tradition, right? They're not writing pop magazine articles, right? If you read Wired magazine, you can find out what BMW is doing now. That's not the job of, say, research. The job is to abstract knowledge and to extend a cumulative tradition. And I think that, sometimes we get, and trust me, I want to know what BMW is doing right now and all of that sort of thing. But that's not our job as professors. We're not journalists, right?
All right, let's move away a little bit from these overly generalized statements, about that institution. Like, just to wrap that up, both of you have, I think, some truth to it, right?
Dude, we're just getting going. Why are you being Mr.
Let me make
Peacemaker?
So I will say this: like,
I'm injecting controversy into our podcast, and you are diffusing controversy.
Can I make my point now? The academic system in Germany is certainly more varied still, in that you have all of the elements that you all just described. They're all there. They're not uniformly there. Yeah. So, like Jason mentioned, Augsburg, I think, or wherever Daniel is, and Thun, these are two places, and they're pretty unique places. And there are other places that maybe do the Wired magazine kind of thing. So it is more varied. It's more heterogeneous, I would say. And secondly, of course, it's been in transition for at least a decade, and it's been in transition towards the American system. I think it'd be hard to deny that is also a fact. So to me, the more interesting question is whether it'll become just like the US with the business school model, with all the goods and bads, of course, with all the advantages and disadvantages, what we see there. We do see signs of that. We've never seen as many MISQ paper ever by Germans, in every issue. Or, of course, whether they retain some of the advantages from the old system, right? So whether they find that middle ground where most people would, and I would place myself at, there's advantages to either system. The big hooray will come if we find a way of finding that perfect sweet spot in the middle, right? I'm trying that, but it's very difficult to do, right? For a variety of reasons.
And for my 2 cents here, I think Germany's a lot of peaks and valleys. There are some really outstanding chairs. There's some chairs that make me sad. I meet the students from them. They're perfectly bright. I wish I could hug them and bring them back to the States and to make them mine. And I can't. And I don't know how to advise them when I meet them. But what I do hope happens in Germany is they don't lose that connection or that spirit of we study interesting questions for industry. Because what happened in American academia since the 1950s, on the business side at least, is because we wanted to become better social scientists and better scientists, we distanced ourselves from questions of industry. And right now, Germany has an opportunity to hit the sweet spot. And I think more Americans are doing it too, by the way, as people interact more across the different countries. Because I think China, the States, the Singapore, Hong Kong, and much of the EU, but not all of the EU, we're all kind of converging on we need impact and we need rigor in how we chase impact. There's going to be variations in how we do it. And I think that's good because I think the heterogeneity makes us collectively stronger. But I really would hate to see Germany, to visit a German chair and find that they had not a single project with a connection to a company. That would be terrible.
That would be terrible. There are generalities that you're making about the U.S. And the fact is, I agree with you, right? There's way more distance from industry than there should be in our research. That doesn't mean there aren't researchers who are just embedded in industry and doing wonderful things. But a lot of it is this data thing that's happened in the last decade or so. All this data is available, and I'm guilty of it myself, right? I look at open source software, for example, in some of my projects, and you can just go to GitHub and download that data. And a lot of these econometrics studies, you can just go get archival data, download it, run your regressions, right? So the fact that data is available in the world, it might not be intra-organizational. And that's why when I'm at MISQ as a senior editor, when I get a paper where they actually got organizational data, like data about a company that's hard to get, that you can't just download, I kind of give it a benefit of the doubt as much as possible, right? I want to try and publish that. Now, sometimes the authors don't let me, but the
the authors don't let you publish a paper. That's like a perfect title.
No, they do. Authors self-handicap a lot of the time, right? You ask them to do something, and sometimes they can't. And rather than admitting they can't, they make something up. It makes the paper unpalatable.
Absolutely, right? Yeah, that's a very good point, Jason. Like tell editors if you really cannot do things, then that's legit, right? That's a perfectly valid answer. And instead they get into some sort of evasive, defensive thing, like they become a turtle and go into their shell, right? Hey, tell me this, like, because of what Nick just said, Jason, I wanted to ask you on this, because of course you're known for many things, but of course in recent years you've topped the charts of, the most productive journal author, blah, blah, blah. So you have a reputation for publishing a lot of top journal papers. You do, right? So that said, so because my response to Nick's point about everyone studying data and no one goes into the organization, my immediate response has been, for at least for the last 5 years, is, well, that's what I'm going to do. Like, I'm going to go into this niche that is harder to do because I think it gives me a competitive advantage because there's less competitions in these spaces. The downside of that strategy is, of course, you're sacrificing productivity. You cannot write 20 of such papers a year. It's just not possible, right? It's like you would have to have a different program. You would have to take different types of methods, different types of data to write more papers in the same amount of time. So for example, when I started in Hamburg and started building a team here, I was like, look, if we want to do this, just keep in mind, we will not be the team that has, 10 thesis papers every year. We're not going to have 10 journal papers every year, or let alone 10 job panels, top papers every year. It just takes too much time for every single one of them. No, every single one of them may have a competitive advantage because people like this kind of research. On that, I agree with Nick, because it's rare. Like, not a lot of people still do that. So I wanted to ask you on this, whether you would agree or you see this differently. You know what I'm getting at?
I will attempt to make sense of it. So I think what you're asking me is, how do you stay productive against the backdrop of all the demands to have conference papers and other things and whatnot?
That was a good job, because I couldn't get that from what Record just said. I felt like he talked a lot, and I don't know what his question was actually.
He wandered a little, but that's okay.
Wow.
Sometimes it takes a while to figure things out. And if you ever read my LinkedIn stuff, I wander a lot. And often I'm since making those posts. So I think what you have to do is two things. Okay. One, if you read a lot of my work, I have three backbones. Okay. One is I do a lot of experiments that are based on psychometrics.
Yeah, true.
I have a method I like. The second is I'm open-minded if one of my students comes to me and says, I want to try something different. Okay. So you'll often find that I have 2 or 3 papers with a student who I've worked with, who I've helped shape ideas, I've helped mentor, I've provided resources to, but I can't claim to be the intellectual leader, particularly if the method is novel. Okay. And then the third thing is you have to be somewhat thematic. And my record looks really chaotic to people, but if you go back and look at it since 1998, I've looked at really 3 themes.
Yeah, I'd say so too, actually.
Yeah, I've done I've got a 4th theme that I don't like owning, but I'm part of it.
Can I try to guess your themes? Can I try to guess your themes? So I'd say number 1 is mindfulness. So the second theme is identity. And the third theme, in a way, is sort of methodologically, sort of like to me, I would associate with you construct development. You've done a lot of work on how do we, define, operationalize, and develop, entire new construct, including the measures, etc., and so forth. So these 3 buckets, I would put you in. I wonder if you agree with that.
No, I don't. So I would call that one theme. So I'm really interested in how people take information in, they perceive it, they process it, and then what happens next. And so mindfulness is a big piece of it. But if you look at my early stuff, it was about efficacy and the decisions about ability to do things. It evolved into mindfulness, and then it evolved into looking at social media and how people process that information and the cues about the self and the decisions people make with it. And I look at that as all one giant bucket of decision making and how we do make things. A second thing people don't talk about, but if you go look at it, I have as many A hits as almost anyone else in it, is I look at top management teams and decision making. So IT strategy and digitization. I've been doing that consistently. I've had 3 or 4 A hits in the space, which as many as a lot of people have in their careers, right? And part of that's been driven by really good students. I give all credit.
In our special issue, you have one, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's one.
So that was one of the best teams I've worked with. It was such a good experience. And then the third thing I work on, and then there's the measurement pieces that I write. But those measurement pieces are all ancillary to a project I do. I have a philosophy I work with where I call it writing papers in sets. So if I want to learn how to study a topic and I need to do a new method, I like to write a how-to guide. And I figure if I'm taking all the time to figure it out, why not share it so someone else doesn't have to suffer the pain? And some of those how-to papers have become pretty popular.
So I want to ask you about how-to, because you you and I, and this is where I wanted to start this conversation actually, is you and I did this experiment. It's an exploratory experiment, right? We did an experiment without hypotheses.
Yeah, first ever.
Yeah, it was kind of cool.
Absolutely, it is.
But so that's going to be out this year. But we, I'm not an experimentalist. I have this paper, a couple others. I like playing with it. And here we have this wonderful opportunity, I guess, of MTurk, but that's going out of vogue. But now it's prolific and some of these online places where you can get people. And you have more of these publications, and you even have them in like Journal of Applied Psychology and places like that outside of our field. So that's what I want to know from you. You are Joe Experiment. What's your how-to guide for publishing these experiments using, say, Prolific and places like that? And you're like, what are like the do's and don'ts? Guide us.
So the first thing you have to remember is it's going to cost you some money. And I've been really, really fortunate to work at places that are willing to fund me to run multiple experiments. So typically we had a JP recently that are in doxing. We went through 159 iterations of the survey and the manipulation before we ever launched the study.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
That means that from initial creation of survey, we had a team of 6 people working on it. If I remember right, we had from initial creation of the survey through all the manipulations, so making sure things worked, didn't work, tweaking and refining. We made 159 timestamp changes, versions of the survey and experiment itself.
How many of those did you test, like pre-test with, say, people or on Prolific or something?
We went through 10 rounds of pre-testing.
Holy moly.
Well, that's how you got to do it. I mean, like if you ask people like how you got to do it, this is exactly the way to do it. You don't see that in the paper, but all this type of research takes a lot of effort in design, not in running and analyzing. That's kindergarten in comparison to the effort that goes into the design.
And if you don't get that front part right, you don't get the paper done. You know,
exactly.
And so what you end up with is kind of a paper you're trying to salvage, and an experiment that doesn't work just doesn't work. You're not going to place it well. You know, so I've got dozens of studies on the cutting room floor that just didn't work out, that really kill me that didn't work out. Like we did one on sports fandom, and we wanted to know how people responded to Alabama fans since they kept winning football titles. Yeah, it didn't work out. You know, we couldn't get enough Alabama fans to participate. Maybe they're not on the internet. I don't know. and at the end of it, and someday I'll actually I'll run this study. We realized it wasn't that people hated Alabama fans. We realized that many people around extreme sport fans just hate hearing about extreme sports. They get sick of hearing about whatever team it is, Bo Russia, FC Bayern. You know, the Champions League game is coming up. They get sick of hearing about the Eagles.
When he said Bo Russia, I think he meant Borussia BVB, my team, Dortmund.
That's your team?
Yeah.
It sounds horrible in both.
Look at the logo. I can't see it. I've got their logo on my back wall.
So everyone that's listening, they're talking about Borussia. That's how he says Borussia Dortmund.
Yeah, you know. So my German is. This is the fraud of Jason. I can't speak German. But I love BVB. I think they're a great team. I get a lot of heat from my friends in Munich for it. But yeah, so step one, Nick, is you can't denigrate the upfront work. Okay, step 2 is you have to understand psychometrics. And a lot of people thinking putting a survey together is easy. It's not. You know, I've been building surveys consistently since 1998 when I took my first instrument design class. And people forget that the stem is as important as the items. Sampling the domain space is as important as reliability. You know, when I see papers that have a 0.95 reliability, I worry because I've asked the same question again and again. You know, I was trained the ideal is a reliability of around a 0.8 is good because you need some noise to actually measure a domain space, right?
And then it's about like convergent and discriminant validity, right? You want to.
But if it converges too much, you're asking the same question over and over again.
I like that.
Right? So I really struggle when I see, like, the first time I saw a TAM paper, I freaked out because I came over from policy studies, and over there I've been trained. You know, a 0.8 is a miracle. who are, and I was like, this can't be real. And a very famous person was in the room, and I criticized their paper. I didn't realize they were in the room, and I've never stopped paying the price for that one. I get made fun of by people that are in the room that day to this day for that. So you have to learn the basics, right? You have to know psychometrics. You have to understand research design. You have to understand how to construct a manipulation, and then when you go online, and I think that's more of what you're after is not a tutorial quasi experimental designs. It's how do you navigate the platform? Okay, and MTurk is hard because MTurk has these communities of MTurkers that surround it. Okay, and if you post a hit that has good money tied to it, they tell each other, and suddenly you're done in 5 seconds.
So let me play that back. So what you're saying there, when you said like you have to navigate the platform, to me, I would say like you have to worry very hard about the validity of your sample. Like how do you know something about who's responding, and how do you make sure that the people that you need to respond are actually the people that do respond?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm referencing. Thanks for the clarification. That's better than I could have said it. This is why you write textbooks and I just write papers. So what my team has done, and it's taken us 10, 15 years to figure it out, is how to get enough white noise into the manipulation so it has ecological validity. Right. Yeah. And when we first ran an experiment, we did a straight manipulation. We gave them an image of this political image versus this political image. And we did talk out loud exercises with our respondents, and the respondents were like, this isn't real. This is no one would ever post this. So then we had to figure out like what was appropriate white noise. And so we'd put in like, I walked my dog, I pet my cat and whatnot. And we had these really interesting experiences of people that doing our talk out loud. Oh, they walked their dog. That's nice. Didn't even notice it. They have a cat. I hate cats. And so we don't include cats as white noise anymore because there's a strong affective response some people have to cats. Wow. You know, we thought, okay, this is back when hipsters were cool. So we included some white noise about where people ate, and people responded really negatively to people eating at places like Chili's. Like, who would eat there? That place is terrible. But if our protagonist, it gets better. If our protagonist was a young person, like entry-level job seeker, and they're eating at a fancy restaurant, they're like, what kid can afford that food?
Yeah.
Right. So you had to calibrate. You have all these little things that you have to calibrate in terms of getting that manipulation straight.
Right. And you test that, right? You do pre-tests, and then you get and then you leave like open-ended bodies of for them to actually respond that way. So
the first wave through, you build out the survey. At the bottom of the survey, for those people that are pre-testing, leave open-ended spaces for them to give you feedback. Ideally, if you have time, and sometimes you can, sometimes you can't, you do talk out loud. You'll get a student and you'll have them click through it and ask them to talk, and you learn a lot from that. And so there's that piece of it, which is really time consuming. There's a lot of tacit knowledge in it. And someday I'll sit down and actually write a paper on all the lessons learned. But the problem is they keep evolving because Twitter keeps evolving, Facebook keeps evolving, right?
What about Prolific? You don't trust MTurk as much? It's got bots, it's got but is Prolific trustworthy?
So now you're getting to sampling. Prolific is better, okay, simple. But Prolific even has problems. So what we've learned to do with Prolific is we actually build a panel within the panel. So we'll do a pre-study where I pay 50 cents a hit, ask 10 questions to qualify someone in. Out of those 10 questions, only one is relevant. We invite the people that answer that question on point back to do the study 2 weeks to a month later.
That's pretty clever.
In the final part of the study, we then ask the same question we asked to qualify in. And it should be something that doesn't change that qualifying in attribute, right? So we can assess the veracity of the way they respond. And if they don't respond, we either dump them from the sample, we pay them, because we learned the hard way. They complain to our IRB if we don't, and then our IRB tells us we have to pay. We just pay them. Right. Yeah. But then we run the analysis twice. We run it once with everyone that filled out the study, and we run it once without the people that were the people that we aren't sure are honest or not.
So Jason, you could say, if I play back what you just said, in a way you could say, look, just read a good textbook and follow it damn closely, because you're basically saying all the things that a good experimental textbook tells you to do, right? Like test, pre-test, do manipulation checks, right? So it's not rocket science. So is the real issue here that people are trying to do shortcuts or something, or they don't read, which is Nick's argument, or what is the issue?
So I think Nick's argument on reading is a good one. An amazing number of people claim to write a new paper, and you do a quick search and it was done in 1960. So that's challenge one. Challenge two is a lot of people are self-taught. I think we have to cut ourselves a break here. I took one experimental design class in graduate school. I didn't start running experiments till 2008, 2009. I've had to do a lot of reading to catch up. And people that are
Same here, by
self-taught
the
make
way.
mistakes, right?
Yeah.
And so we have to be a little bit self-forgiving. Problem three is that there's tremendous pressure to be fast to market.
Yeah.
I've never had an MISQ that made it through. Why not? I just had one, but that made it through in 3 rounds. But it took us 6 years to write the paper.
Right.
Usually experiments, then they have you collect more data in the review process, don't they?
Depends. Like I've got one that's I'm optimistic about that we only ran they never asked us for new data, and it's like the first time ever.
That would be the first time ever, yeah.
Often you do 3, 4, 5, 6 data collections, not all of which appear in the paper because there's not room in the paper, right?
But you have it in the review process, right? You're like telling the reviewers.
So they go through the review process. They end up on the cutting room floor. You acknowledge the data collection happened in an appendix, and so to your point, Jan, is, since I'm rambling a little here, is there's a lot to it. There's people don't know the literature, people don't know research methods, people don't take the time because they're in a hurry. I mean, like one of the downsides of the German system, Americans, we hire on potential, right?
Yeah.
We hire people who we think can do stuff. Germans want proven commodities and chairs.
Yeah. Hey, Record.
That's right. Yeah.
Record, to go to your point, they should just read a good textbook on. I think a lot of what Jason said was that, certainly with validating manipulations and things like that. But at the end there, when he was talking about sampling, he was validating the sample far more deeply than I think a textbook would tell you to do, because of this prolific.
Of course, that's why he's at the fat end tail of the distribution, right? That's why he sits at the top, right? If you just follow the textbook, you'll do it okay. If you want to do it really, really well, then of course you got to go beyond, right?
Well, and you always have to listen to people, right? That's the other thing. Like one of the challenges, like I was in a brown bag thing here at Colorado the other day. And one of the challenges that we're all dealing with that use panels is people are using ChatGPT type tools. They're designing bots to fill out the surveys for us. Well, how do you catch a bot? And one of my colleagues pointed out, if you did one of the guardrails they built into most bots is they're not supposed to have emotion. So he puts an open-ended questions that ask difficult emotional questions of the bot. And
that's a clever idea.
If they can't be answered, he screens that particular respondent out, which is really smart, right? And so you kind of have to constantly iterate on that sampling piece. If you can get a good sample and your theory is good and you have an interesting question, you might make it into a good journal.
Right.
So Jason, let me pivot a little bit here, because you said that one of your big things and one of your big interests is in psychometrics. Now, you may or may not know, like a couple of years ago, Nick and I had an episode that we actually called Survey Research is Dead. And we actually
I do know. You guys made me mad.
Classic, cross-sectional, TAM-like survey. We asked people about perceptions and intentions and stuff like this. So I want to throw this out here as a folk theory. Isn't survey research dead? Like, what are we doing with psychometrics in an age where we see actual data on actual behavior?
I think you're wrong. I don't think it's dead. I was really mad when I heard about that, because I was like, you guys killed my whole genre of research. I was like, you invalidated.
Yeah, but you don't even do surveys anymore, Jason. No one does surveys anymore, right? When's the last time you published a survey?
We all use survey methods, right?
Yeah.
You have to distinguish between a cross-sectional single-shot survey and building every experiment I run uses exactly the same Likert type skills, semantic differential skills, and whatnot. All of those skills are still relevant. It's how you embed the survey in your design. So, for example, like a design I think is really compelling, Nick, is you have to pair an experiment with a survey. You do a survey to determine whether the phenomenon exists. You do the experiment to understand the causality around it.
Yeah. All right. So this is what I'm hearing. I'm hearing the only place for psychometrics anymore is in experiments.
No, that's what you're putting the words in my mouth, and I don't agree with that.
What I hear is you can't do exclusive survey research. You have to do survey research and.
I would say that for individual level research, sure.
Yeah.
Okay. But I would say that for firm level research, I'm still seeing people sneak in and they're doing single shot cross-sectional surveys. They're running an FSQCA. And I've got a few of these papers out there, and they're saying, oh, here are these interesting patterns. I think firm level is a lot harder. It's a lot harder to get longitudinal data that taps into decision makers' minds, right?
Mm-hmm.
But even those studies, I think you have to pair it with like an applicability check. So if you're going to do a couple cross-sectional surveys to get at a problem, you actually at the back end of it, you need to do at least some lightweight interviews with executives to say,
Yeah.
does this look about right? So,
Or if you do across the way we, at least what I recall, the way we left our podcast is I said, okay, there are editors. I imagine, Jason, you're one of these. I'm one of these. Recker's probably one of these, that if someone actually came to us with a longitudinal, survey where they repeated measured people over a period of time, say some organizational change, or if someone had a good matched pair, survey where they had team members and team leaders and, where it was a really nice design. A cross-sectional single shot survey is tough to publish anywhere. But if you had real organizational data and you had an elegant design, matched pair, repeated measures, one of these, you would still get published. Now, the reason we don't see it is because those are hard. You need that organization to do it. And people aren't really trained in that like they were back when we got our PhDs.
I don't even know if I agree with they aren't trained in that. I think that young people tend to flock to what they see getting published. And so I think kids are still getting trained, but we're seeing a lot more papers with archival data because people think that's easier to publish. I actually think that paradigm is shifting. I think that what we're seeing much more now is a pairing of archival data with experiments, because you have to actually be able to talk about the mechanism and the causality.
Right. That is certainly a trend. Yeah.
We've kind of gone full circle, right? We went out into the wilderness and we took advantage of all the data you were talking about, Nick. And it was a wonderful exploration. But at the end of the day, the questions of causality were still there.
Yeah.
And the only way to get at that is through doing some kind of experiment with a manipulation where we gather data from people.
But couldn't you say that there's now a phase of revival of individual level research, especially in HCI, now that everyone is studying how do individuals use ChatGPT for this and this and that? I mean, like that sounds like an age where we want to get back into psychometric because we want to see what people think, feel, and do when they get exposed to prompting and the responses and whatever they do with that, right? So that's back to individual level stuff more so than firm level stuff.
I never really felt like we were in an individual level winter. And I've had a lot of people talk to me about that, like many times. Like I was in 2009, 2010, I presented my mindfulness paper at a school that shall not be mentioned, and the senior person there said, "Oh, I'm kind of worried about you. You're never going to publish that paper."
He was wrong. He or she was wrong.
And then they told me that my career was done and I'd never be a full professor. I think what's important is you have the right method for the right question.
That's a pretty forward thing to say to anyone at any stage.
Moral of the story is you were wrong about Jason.
Yeah.
I mean, it is what it is. I mean, but I'll tell you, being told that motivated me. At that point, it became like, well, I'm not going to change. I'm going to keep doing good work, and persistent helped.
So the other thing, being persistent helped, because not only did you get to be a full professor and a full chaired professor and one of the most well-known, I mean, you were president of AIS, you have all these roles of service in our organization, you're senior editor at ISR. You are a rock star. And not only do you have that, but you're like the IS field's foremost influencer on LinkedIn. Now, frankly, I think you and I've told you this, I think you overpost. You could probably
I embrace that title.
So what's going on? So I look at I probably don't catch all your LinkedIn articles because I don't think but I see a lot of them. Yeah. So what's the strategy there? What are you doing? Like, what's your motivation? Tell us about being an influencer. I
don't know. One of my colleagues at Temple challenged me. He said, "Get off Facebook. I'm sick of hearing about your Facebook. Try LinkedIn." And where on Facebook had an audience of 1,500, on LinkedIn I found I could have impact across disciplines. And what I really found was, and this came from a belief from traveling the world and talking to people and talking to a lot of students. Students aren't getting mentored the way they were when I started. Like in the 90s, when you described that American model of, we had 5 or 6 students and 5 or 6 faculty that mentored each of us. Now because people are pushing papers so hard, they're working with their advisors and they're not getting big picture thinking. And a lot of tacit knowledge isn't getting transferred. And what I found when I got challenged to try LinkedIn was I could start writing about things professionally that I normally would have as a conversation with my student. And I started getting a lot of direct messages from kids, like kids in India, kids in China, kids in Europe, kids in the States saying, I really needed to hear that today.
Hmm.
And for me, that became really motivating.
I agree, and I think that if you ask people, that's the big value add that they see in the post. My theory on this is like, I just think, and I said this to Nick once, I think you just got out of what used to be pretty elite little bubble of the level of education that you got when you did your PhD within the system and within the schools with the supervisors that you guys had. You just didn't see other forms, other levels, other, quality that was out there in PhD level education. Not everyone is at a top school. Not everyone has a great advisor. In fact, most don't. And I think like as Americans, I'm sorry, this is overly general, but as Americans opened themselves up to the other regions that were doing IS scholarship, that you just got to see that for the first time in your life. Like, and so that's still, and the point to that is that's still out there. I mean, it's nice to say that, in Germany, there's more people publishing great work, which they do. But I can tell you 100 stories of horrible, horrible things that I see every single day, like here and everywhere else I've been, which, frankly, doesn't include much of the North America, but everywhere else I've been, Asia, Australia, Europe, there's the good, the bad, and the ugly. There's no other way to put it. What did you say? Peaks and valleys. That's very apt.
Yeah, no, and there is. And so the motivation to go on LinkedIn was when my colleague was sick of Facebook. He was tired of pictures of my kid in dinner, which was fair. But then the other piece was I found that I could be a voice on issues that other people couldn't be, and I could speak directly to issues other people couldn't be. And Jan, your point on becoming cognizant that not everyone had that American training really became clear to me when I was AIS president. Like that really changed the way I saw the world. And I wouldn't tell anyone to run for AIS president for the glory and the glamour, because there's not a lot.
No, there's not a lot of glamour in that. It's a lot of work in that year. Yeah.
It's a lot of work for 3 years, because there's a pre and a post. And in my case, there was a post because of Donald Trump. It was because we wanted to have a little more long-term perspective on council that year. So they asked me to hang around for a little longer. But what I really got a clear sense of was how different the training was. And the real tragedy of it to me was how many really, really smart, talented people weren't getting the training they needed.
Yeah.
And a lot of that training was soft skills. It wasn't, they could pick up a textbook. Like there are so many people smarter than me in this world that can pick up a textbook, figure out a method, figure out this, figure out that, but they could never tell a story with it.
Yeah.
Right. They would go, it doesn't matter, I wrote this great paper, it's methodologically pure, but they don't know how to participate in the community and where to show up so that they can understand how to tell a story the community understands.
Yeah.
Right. And that's where I see LinkedIn is kind of helping me fill a role. As I got out of leadership, I'd met all these people, I felt a vocation to continue to serve. And LinkedIn for me is service. It's nothing about me. I actually am really shy if you come up to me and talk to me about my LinkedIn. I kind of stumble for words because I don't feel comfortable about it. It's like it's a different part of my life.
I don't think many people would label you as shy, Jason, but I get what you're saying. But
do you run out of content ever?
Well, people keep screwing up around me, so I have lots of content. Like everywhere I go, I see something that I'm like, this is something I'm thinking about, or something comes through my feed. Like I saw this great article in the Wall Street Journal yesterday about Wiley. I don't know if you saw it. They canceled 19 journals.
They did?
Because of paper mills. Like we all complain about the publisher, and I'm a leading advocate of saying publishers are bad. But when Wiley took the step of saying their journals were not being well managed, and they canceled them.
Were any of them IS journals?
No, not that I'm aware of. But I mean, our discipline, I'm not even going to go down that road. But it really got me thinking, like, maybe the conversation we should be having is, one, we should support publishers willing to take extreme steps like this. Give them some credit, right?
Yeah, that is cool.
Absolutely.
And then the second thing that we should be thinking about is, why did they have to cancel them? And it's because editors weren't doing their jobs.
Yeah.
And we should have a bigger conversation about editors being responsible. And there's some things that
editors are the worst human beings for the most part. The number one reason, Jason, is they don't edit. right? They do the vote counting bullshit, which is, you're in this profession to publish papers. That's your job as an editor. And it's to basically have the discretion, the decision making that these are the terms by which I'm going to publish this paper. That's your job as an editor. Instead, they send it out to random reviewers. They let reviewers make decisions. They do things like say, turn this reviewer. When you didn't turn the reviewer, therefore you're rejected. They're lazy. They're lazy as hell, and they're risk averse. So instead of identifying a good paper and finding a way to publish it, they're saying, it's not perfect, reject. So that's one of the reasons in our top journals we have so much mediocrity, because risk averse, lazy ass editors.
Okay, let me give you a slightly different spin on this. I would say the big issue is lack of accountability. And a senior editor, especially in EIC or something of that kind, is accountable to no one. If I'm slow, unresponsive, a horrible human being, whatever I'm doing, no one is doing anything about it. I could easily take 11 months. What's the worst that can happen to me with a decision letter? Say the worst thing that can happen to me is that they get an email where someone kindly asked me to speed up or something.
Yeah, you're right.
That's the worst that happens.
I don't know about that part. 'Cause like when Super sends me an email at ISR, it gets my attention.
Yeah, because you and Super are Super.
Really made me feel a lot of pressure to be faster.
Yeah.
Like most of my papers come through in 90 days. If it's more than 90 days, it's because I really have to think about it. So
it's because you're busy and you haven't thought about it yet. You do it in a day or two. You don't think about things for 90 days.
I have one right now I'm having to think about.
Yeah, but for a couple days, you don't think about things for a month.
Sometimes
that's silly. That's an excuse.
If it's
no,
in the
you
third
don't.
or fourth round, it isn't always a straightforward. To me, if it goes beyond the third round, we have a commitment to publish.
I agree.
And because I'm making decisions which alter someone's life, I would rather take an extra 30 days. If I read it once, I'm going to go, it's a reject. And then I'm going to take step back 30 days later, come back and look at it. If it's this early career person, especially. And
so not only are you rejecting, you're rejecting their paper, but you're making them wait an additional 30 days to reject their paper.
I'm making sure it's the right decision. And sometimes I change my decision. And I'd rather change that decision twice and 50 times and help some kid get tenure than kill someone's case. 30 days isn't going to make or break most careers, but a rejection can.
Yeah, there is something to that. So I know my lack of accountability idea didn't seem to fly. Let me take a second attempt at that.
No, I think your accountability part flies. It doesn't fly with Nick necessarily.
No, it flies. I think you're right. That's one of the reasons why senior editors are awful. I'm not against it. I agree.
I think there's a secondary issue going on you guys aren't talking about because you're focused on the mechanics of peer review. I'm looking at the insider trading of special issues, which doesn't happen at the top journals, but it's rife at the bottom journals, and that's why Wiley pulled those journals.
Insider trading? You mean like little
I'll take your paper because I know you're advising. You're from the right school.
Collusion.
Kind of
You're talking about collusion.
And that kind of misconduct. We know what's going on. I've never found any evidence of it at our top journals. I've had to do, when I was AIS president, I had to deal with some accusations of it. I had to investigate them, and you know what? Person was clean. People just get jealous of really productive people sometimes.
That is true.
But these journals are getting shuttered because paper mills are finding ways or finding angles, and they're actually, some of them are even paying editors at some of these journals in academia to publish papers.
Wow.
And to me, that's the thing. It's like every journal should have a board that sits on top of the editor that they have to report to every 6 months that shows cycle times. Every senior editor should be asked, and this gets back to your point, Nick and Jan. Every senior editor should be asked, why is it taking you more than 90 days on average? I'm fine with some variance, right? Yeah. But 90 days, so wipe out the desk rejects, wipe out anything that took less than 2 weeks. Okay. But our 90 to 120 days on average is about right for a paper.
Yeah, it's awful, actually. There's no reason it should take 90 to 100 days to turn around a paper. That's the silliest thing.
Yeah, but these are different points of view. Like it's still better than when I was a doctoral student and I sent my first summarized quarterly out and I got it back 14 months later.
Yeah, but that was awful. That was criminal. But it was also a time where, some of the most senior people only had a couple of top tier publications, right?
Yeah,
this is a different.
You put stuff in the mail, right? Like my first MISQ went out in a brown manila envelope. I'm pretty old.
Yeah, this is a different age. This is an age where people, first of all, there are a lot of prolific people. It's people's careers depend on it. And it drives me crazy. I've recently gotten, in the last few years, gotten review packages that took a year, you know?
Yeah, see, I don't think that's acceptable. I actually think
I
course
don't
not.
think that's acceptable. And I would say like we gotta be more outspoken about this. We gotta name. Why can't we name the journals and or the editors where that happens? We all still have these stories, and we play hush hush about it.
I think what should happen is that editors should start firing senior editors.
Yeah,
I think there should be actual governance, there's real world impact. Now, the hardest thing I have though is I do know that it's hard for people to turn reviews in 2 weeks. And since we in places where I submit to where I know that there's a standing rule 2 weeks to 30 days for reviews, I typically get a lower quality review. And so if you're going to compress time, where you have to compress the time is as at the editor's desk. Like the editor should set aside a day each week. They should sit down. Any paper that comes in that comes back from their AEs and their authors, they should decision those papers within 2 weeks.
Yeah, of course.
I have a day of the not the day of the week thing, but when I get a paper on my desk, in that moment, it's my top priority. Like seriously, like it pushes the other things on my to-do list further down below, and that because I can't work like every Saturday I do my editorial work or whatever. But I will say that an SE anything is top of my to-do list in the moment this email comes into my inbox, and that's how I handle it. And this is actually, if I may say that, very 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 fast. I usually don't take more than a day.
You're
or two
crazy fast.
Yeah.
You're crazy fast. So Wrecker you don't have to worry about him sitting on anything. But is your point about reviewers, Jason? I think that's a problem with the culture, right? We send papers. Every time I send a paper, I'm expecting 5 people, if it's MISQ, to look at it, right? I'm expecting the senior editor, associate editor, and 3 reviewers, right? And I send a few papers every year. So that means the way I think about it is I have at least 10 I should be reviewing. If I send 2 papers, that's 5 people I've asked to look at my papers that year. That means I have to do it for 10. That means every other week at least, I'm going to be reviewing a paper. So if I'm doing something every other week or thereabouts, right? Every 3 weeks, I should put it in my calendar. I can't just, and this is the problem. People they schedule their lives without any review time in their life. So then they're like, oh, I'm really busy this month, but next month I may have some time to review on that. Meanwhile, they've submitted 3 papers, right? I think that's criminal. I think it's awful. And I think people don't schedule review time. Now, however you schedule your review time, if you're submitting papers, it's your moral duty to schedule time in your life to do the reviews and do those damn reviews. And whether they're good or, you have to do your best for the main issues. I mean, especially early rounds, you just have to help the editor catch the big issues. Mm-hmm. And then you go there, you help the editor catch the big issues, and you don't need 3, 4, 5 weeks for this. If every 2, 3 weeks you schedule time in your life to do these reviews. And the problem is, since people don't schedule, they try to fit it in. And I've asked this. I did a impromptu. I asked a ton of people when I was at Georgia. I asked a ton of people, when do you do your review? And almost everyone said, as soon as I get that reminder that it's due in a week, then I hurry up and prioritize it and figure out a way to do it in the next 2, 3 weeks. Right? That's what they said. So they didn't actually look at it till they got their reminder that it's due in a week. And then people figured it out, because they didn't schedule time to do reviews.
So I 100% agree with you on the scheduling review time thing. I'd never thought of it that way, but I think that's genius. Just put it in your calendar, block it out, and you do your review in that time.
Yeah, and if you don't have a review, then you get that gift of a morning.
You have a free hour, exactly.
Yeah. I think that's genius. I honestly had never thought about that.
Guys, I don't think we've ever had an hour on the podcast that went by so quickly. And, we need to wrap up. You know that people don't listen for an hour. They listen to 45 minutes. So they may actually lose this part. But I have two final questions. Jason.
Sure.
We'll just get Jason back on. He's an influencer. So we just gave him something to put on his LinkedIn. He's going to write about how to save time in your schedule for reviews.
I'm going to let you write that one, Nick.
Are you a whistleblower, or do you see yourself as a whistleblower? Like someone that brings, gives a voice to issues that you hear about that no one seems to be speaking about. Is that what you do on LinkedIn?
That's a really interesting question. I speak my mind. I'm kind of a Quaker in the sense of when I feel like I need to speak, I speak. And sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. Do I bear the penalty of a whistleblower? Sometimes, yeah.
Because whistleblower is an honorable, but it's also very difficult. Like you do end up in a lot of shitstorms, so to say.
Everything that you read about whistleblowing and being punished by your employer and community are true. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
I've said some things that I felt compelled to say. I don't regret it too often, but often I wish I'd said them more nicely. But I mean, I can own that. But yeah, there's a price that comes with it. And I think people need to be cognizant of that. And the reason I can say what I can is I'm probably in my last job. I'm probably I've had enough papers. My income is secure. I wouldn't tell a young person to go out and scream from the rooftops. I think that's an obligation that we as stewards of the field and as senior people bear.
The senior people. Yeah.
And I think the senior people aren't doing a very good job right now in our field.
No.
Or you could put it this way: we don't have a lot of stewards left. There was more stewardship in, I don't know, the 90s or 2000s, and now everyone's just busy publishing even more papers, even those that don't need them anymore.
I won't argue that.
So. And then usually, Jason, what we do is, when we have people like you, of course, is give some advice. And the reason we always say that is that the next time we do a podcast, we can, criticize you for the advice that you gave. That's usually what we do.
Read my LinkedIn if you need advice. I don't know.
Okay, that's the advice. Follow Jason on LinkedIn if you haven't done so already.
No, I wouldn't. Actually, don't. I have enough followers. Follow people you're interested in. I honestly, what I tell anyone is learn a method. If you're starting your career, really learn a method.
Yeah.
Really get deep in it, really embrace it, really understand it, because it's going to help you think through problems.
Yeah.
And people forget that's the value of methods. It's not the analysis you can perform, it's the rigor of thinking that comes and the structure it gives you.
And it gets you a community too, right?
Yeah, and it gets you into a community. Like the people don't know about me, and I tell this story when I do a seminar, is I started out a critical researcher. I didn't start out running surveys and experiments, and that mental model of doing critical research has framed everything I've done ever since. Like if you look at my corpus of work, yeah, it's all survey based and it's empirical, but the question I'm always asking is, why is it this way? Why do we make this decision? Right? That's not very causal empirical psychometry. That's pretty critical, right? And I'm using empirical tools to probe critical questions, and so really take some time to take a step back, figure out a worldview, and that's what your method gives you.
Yeah,
and then be aware of the flaws in that method.
Yep.
I like that. I like that very much. No, that's very good advice. It's much better than follow your passion.
Yeah.
I think follow. So let me do a quick diverge, and then I'll stop talking and let you guys go, because I know we're past time. Yeah, I think following your passion is nice, but that's something that can wait.
Yeah,
I think
it's
you
idiotic.
have to be a little pragmatic. Learn skills so you know enough to know whether your passion is something that should be studied. Take some time to, almost every student I've ever seen come in saying, I'm going to study this, 4 years later is studying something different.
Yeah, agreed.
And everyone I know that's productive and does interesting work evolves over time. Like everyone does. And it's big, so do some learning before you follow that passion. Like the people that are all about passion, I worry about them. Be a little bit pragmatic.
Yep.
All right. Well, that was actually very nice closure to the episode. Jason, that was a blast. That was really good. Like we could keep going forever, I guess. Maybe we do get you on and do a part 2 of this conversation.
Let's do a part 2 with Jason, and then what we're gonna have to do is lock his head in place so that he looks at his microphone, because the people who are listening don't realize this, but Jason doesn't look at the microphone and talk. He looks to the left, then he looks to the right, and then he looks at right. And the problem is, when you have a podcast, is poor Wrecker is gonna have to manage this sound now. Yeah. He's gonna have to figure out what to do. Yeah,
Jason is a swiveler.
I do swivel. And what I probably need to do is hang a ball in front of the microphone and stare at the ball the whole time.
Yeah. Punch it. All right. Well, gentlemen, it's been an honor talking with you. And yeah, we'll get you back on at some stage.
Sure.
Yeah. And Nick, as usual, good to see you every goddamn week of my life.
All right, my brother. Adios.